Recording here. We're live there. Good to go. Check 1 2 3. Check 1 2 3. Go ahead and pop that on. Check 1 2 3 4. Check 1 2. Check. Network check 1 2. Network check 1 2. Network check. All right, everybody, you ready to rock and roll? Welcome to the Unknown Files show. First one in a while. I'm glad you're all there. Hang on, and we're going to get going. We got a good one for you tonight. Soaring high as I release my arrow, reaching for the sky. In this world of chaos, I find my peace. Gearhead archery. All right, welcome to this week's edition of the Unknown Files show, brought to you in part by our good friends out at Revelton Distillery in Osceola, Iowa. Onyx Hunt. Don't ever leave the house without it, and all the other fine partners that help us do the shows each and every week. We have got a good one. We've been on a little hiatus for turkey season, and I personally have been looking forward to this myself for a while now. I've got one of the most premier experts on footprint castings when it comes to the big fellow that you can ever find. If you've ever watched TV or read a book, I'm sure you've come across the name of Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum. Dr. Jeff is a full professor of anatomy and anthropology at the Department of Biological Sciences at Idaho State University. He is also an adjunct professor in the Department of Physical and Occupational Therapy and Department of Anthropology. He is considered one of the top experts, like I said, on footprints and casting. And when it comes to the big fellow, this is the guy that I like to listen to. Welcome, Dr. Jeff. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for
Well,
having me.
it's awesome to have you. Like I said, I've been like a little kid in a candy store. I've been really looking forward to this one.
Good. Well, it's always fun.
You doing well? Things good?
Yes. Yeah. No, things continue to improve, and been hitting the gym and watching my diet. We're trying to get back entirely in the saddle, but it's been a productive 10 months now. 12? No, not 10. 9 months thereabouts.
Well, that's awesome. Hey, Jeff in New York. Good to see you, buddy. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you. You and I were talking a little bit before the show, and if for the first time people's listening to this tonight, welcome to the program. I've been a big fan of this subject matter since I was 9 or 10 years old. I grew up in Missouri, and I came across one when I was in the library for the first time. It's a book by John Green, and
Right.
and I got to learn about this creature running around in the Pacific Northwest, and then I started reading about Ape Canyon and all these other gentlemen out there, and we're going to get into some of those guys. But then in the '70s, we had a thing called Momo the Monster running around people, and that was right around when Boggy Creek came out, if you remember that.
Right. Yeah.
And hey, Rick, good to see you, buddy. Thank you. Everybody's fired up for you, Dr. Jeff. They're excited. Um,
Good.
I just got consumed with it as a kid. I mean, and then In Search of started with Leonard Nimoy, and then the
Right.
Patterson and Gilman film came out, and then it went gonzo, and I've been a big fan of this ever since. How did you get it mixed up in this mess?
Well, it seems like I was just a few steps ahead of you in that with that timeline. I was, excuse me, about 11 years old. Pardon me, about 11 years old, living in Spokane, Washington, when Roger Patterson came through town with his documentary showcasing the infamous, notorious piece of footage, that 60 seconds of footage, and I had no previous experience with Bigfoot. Few of us had. I mean, the kids were all abuzz. This was in fifth grade. I think you mentioned you were 10. I was 10 or 11.
Yeah.
And the kids were all abuzz about this, the advertisement in the paper about this coming to town. And so, man, I remember running home and finding that in the paper and convincing my dad he had to take my younger brother and I to this showing, and that set the ball in motion. It turned out, I won't go into the whole story, but it turned out that our librarian there at Indian Trail Elementary School there in Spokane was John Green's niece, and she had just received a brand spanking new, hot off the press copy of John's book, and I was the first student to be privileged to check it out from her, and that was part in the subsequent year in sixth grade. We actually did a unit on primates in our for science, and again, the short story was I managed to be the one selected to do the report, the project, the major report on Sasquatch, and that led to all kinds of other investigations. But I was enthralled. I mean, I was in it. This was in the days before photocopy machines, and so there was no easy way, and there wasn't much published. I mean, John Green's book was out there. I had purchased Roger Patterson's little booklet, which was based largely on the newspaper clippings from Betty Allen there in Northern California
Yeah.
that he would borrow, and Ivan Sanderson's book, which was a decade or two ahead of its time, and as a result, never got the respect, never had the impact because the prospect of such things existing just did not fit in the paradigm of of human evolution, hominin evolution at that time. That was the conventional wisdom at that time, and so such subhuman bipedal man-like monsters could not exist. Therefore, they didn't, and his book was seen as a work of fiction. So, I consumed Sanderson's book over and over again. But like I said, without photocopy machines, if there was a newspaper clipping or an article, you had to. There were times actually I took photographs, of some of these clippings and whatnot, or you would dictate them,
Yeah.
and so I would actually read them into my little cassette recorder. Or when you talked about the legend of Boggy Creek, I can remember waiting for that to come out at the drive-in theater so I could tape record it off of the car speaker, and then, I would actually play these cassette tapes at night, and
Yeah.
that's how I would fall asleep to listening to the soundtrack of Boggy Creek. They always follow the creek. You remember?
Yeah, and it was
and
like a doc. If you haven't seen that movie, folks, it's like a documentary. It's the way they made it. It's
docudrama kind of
doc.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. It took me a while to get over the bathroom scene, Dr. Meldrum. I'm telling you, just
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah. That when I was little, I'm telling you, it was crazy. Well, and I was trying to do a little bit of research on this since I've been laid up with my foot, but there were four people that I found, and you correct me if I'm wrong because I'm often wrong. Just ask my wife. You can Jim Green, who and a lot of folks don't know that he was actually a Canadian journalist. So I mean, he wasn't like just some Yahoo running around. He actually was. He was very
Yeah,
knowledgeable, and he was good at collecting analytical and stuff and data.
yeah.
And then you had Peter Brine. I hope I'm saying that right. Then Grover Krantz, and then there was a gentleman, Renee. Uh,
Dahin,
well,
Dahin,
there you go. Those
Renee.
were the four early people that were really pioneering this, weren't they? And of course, Gilman and Patterson.
Yes, yes. Bob Gimlin and Roger Patterson and John Green and Peter Byrne. Yeah, Peter Byrne, John Green, Renee DeHinden, and Grover Krantz were sometimes labeled as the four horsemen
There you go.
of
Yeah.
Bigfootry, and so yeah, they each one. I mean, no two the same in that lot. I mean, it was a full house. Each one with different skill sets, different personalities, different foibles. But yeah, it was a wild time. I mean, it was a time when people thought that this was a brass ring to be had. And so there was a lot of competition and a lot of sort of infighting and territoriality and ownership, possessiveness of data. And, eventually it became clear that that brass ring was not going to get snagged very easily. It wasn't a matter of months. It might be a matter of years before the mystery was ever solved. And we kind of had opened onto an era of a lot uh, a greater degree of collegiality and collaboration, sharing of information, and so forth. And then, unfortunately, in some ways, at least in on that note, the internet put the kibosh, because now there was not a brass ring. You weren't going to get rich and famous by being the discoverer of Bigfoot, but you could monetize clicks, and and so people became possessive again all of a sudden of those that were motivated by that approach to the monetization of social media. So
Well,
it's unfortunate that we're kind of back into that groove
oh,
again.
yeah. I mean, the internet totally changed everything. Even in my, if I would have had the internet, when I first started Outdoors Traditions, my hunting show on TV, I mean, there was like 10 TV shows, hunting shows all across. That was it. I mean, there wasn't a lot of them. Yeah. Hey, Rob and Christy Taylor down there at Revelton. Good to see you. If you ever come to Iowa, you got to go down to Revelton, Dr. Meldrum. You're going super
Right?
nice people, and they got great stuff down there too.
Yeah.
The internet totally. If we had that when you and I were younger, boy, would we be farther ahead, wouldn't we?
Yeah, I think we could. We could. I
Yeah,
mean, it serves a very useful purpose, but I mean, like all technology, the product's only as good as what you put into it.
yeah. No, I get it. You,
So
we've been doing this show for 2 years, and like I said, I've been a bow hunter for 33 years. I was raised in the outdoors. My father, my uncle, my grandfather took me out squirrel hunting. I learned woodsmanship. I learned how to track. I learned, find food sources, mass crop, acorns, walnuts, just different things. And Bigfoot never came up or anything like that. You'd hear a bobcat in heat, or
yeah,
you'd hear some other stuff that would like freak you out when you're walking in the woods at night, going home when you're younger. But this just never came up. And then in the '70s and stuff, things progressed. And as I got into being more of a serious hunter and started doing it on TV for a living, and being an outdoor communicator, I got away from the subject matter a little bit, and I was focusing more on actually hunting. And I bow hunt everything, Dr. Jeff. So it's always a lot more time in the tree when you're doing that. But when I came across you, and I started hearing you talk and reading about you in books and different things on the internet and YouTube, you're the one that kind of got me going. Well, maybe I'm looking at this wrong, because when you started talking about the anatomy, the dermal ridges, the abnormality of the footprints and castings that you were getting from people back in the 40s and the 50s, and you were explaining, this is you can see the different size imprints or steps, the insteps. You could see where the arches are broken. I mean, you were going into a podiatry clinic on Sasquatch. I mean, it was, and I'm going, well, now wait a minute. How in the heck could somebody have faked that in the 40s or the 50s? Now, I could see where some of that stuff may be faked now, but I mean, nobody out there with a little wood footprint running around is going to leave that kind of evidence. And you're the one that got me scratching my head.
yeah, yeah. No, it's extremely compelling when people ask me what evidence do I find the most compelling. I have to say, I mean, given my expertise, my appreciation of it, it's that total body of footprint evidence that is so compelling in its remarkable consistency, in its temporal and geographic distribution. As you said, I mean, I don't know of any. The only possible example back in the 40s might have been the Chapman encounter up in Canada, and supposedly there was a footprint cast made. A deputy sheriff went up from Washington State to collaborate with his colleague up there, uh, and uh, and allegedly made a footprint cast, which unfortunately didn't survive. We don't have it today, but we do have the sketch, the outline that was traced of that footprint.
Well,
But it is
Ape Canyon was in the 20s, right? Wasn't that like in
sure,
24?
but
They
they
never.
didn't document any. It was all just anecdotal. It's just
Okay.
their own eyewitness testimonies of these giant creatures. But no, when the first actual, well, there are a couple of photos that float around and so forth of supposedly a very early documentation of footprints, but the real historical one for which there is uh, an anecdotal context. There are people whose names were written down, who reported in the newspapers, were interviewed by none other than John Green. Um, that Chapman case was I mean, that's what set John down the path too. He was
Right.
so impressed by the reaction of this little family and the testimony of those who witnessed these enormous footprints, which just happened to be the exact same size and shape and proportions as uh, the Jerry Crew footprint cast from 1958, one of the first examples of an actual casted footprint documented in that
I
fashion.
don't know about that one, Dr. Meldrum. Where was that at? Was that in California or?
That was in Northern California. It's the famous picture you see of the gentleman with the crew cut and the little spectacles. That's Jerry Crew, appropriately named. And he was a bulldozer operator, a cat skinner, as they called them, and was a very sober guy. Wasn't paying much attention to these stories about giant footprints at some of the construction camps, some of the log or road construction camps, but then came out and saw these footprints repeatedly around his equipment, and
Was that the crew that Roger Patterson and Bob Gilman? Is that where they got the idea to go and look for these? They were hearing the stories from that crew.
I'm sure it was. Yeah, and Roger had also got word, I think, by way of Ivan Sanderson in his articles in True Magazine, for example.
Okay.
And Ivan had gotten wind of what was going, since he was writing about these human-like, man-like creatures, these ABSMs, as he called them, his acronym for Abominable Snowman. Um, he included a chapter on the OMA, on the Bigfoot of California, in his book, as well as wrote a couple of popular articles for men's magazines, True Magazine, and Roger had read those and repeatedly, and so one way or the other, they were became aware, as John Green also became aware of the things that were transpiring in Northern California, and went down there, and he was actually successful in getting an anthropologist, a scientist. He was more of a cultural anthropologist than a physical anthropologist, it turned out. But Don Abbott came down from the British Columbia Museum and was extremely impressed. But he was a junior faculty, and his senior his senior colleagues kind of dissuade him from his enthusiastic intrigue and curiosity, and instilled a more conservative, cautious attitude towards the whole topic, so that when it came time to when the panel at the University of British Columbia was assembled to examine the Patterson Gimlin film, Don Abbott was pretty circumspect, as they all were. I mean, again, it's like I think we were talking before the show started. This was a time when, um, oh, maybe it was when I was mentioning Ivan Sanderson,
Yeah.
and the reason in not, his book came out in the early '60s, and it just fell flat. I mean, the you go to the book reviews, the published book reviews, and they're they give him a nod for his quite intrepid exploration of some of these very wild places around the globe, and his zoological knowledge and investigations. But they said this is just folklore. I mean,
Or yeah,
he's
yeah, tall
just
tales.
yeah, he's just
Yeah,
accumulated a bunch of legends
yeah.
and wove them together to make this rather useless book. And so that was kind of the reaction of so many of the scientists that first viewed the Patterson-Gimlin film. Same reaction. There was no context that would accommodate the existence of such a thing. And so it wasn't a question of, well, let's evaluate it objectively and weigh the evidence. It was, it can't exist, therefore it doesn't. And what explanation, what rationale can I fall back on in order to justify my biased reaction?
Yeah.
And as a result, there were some really silly statements that were made, which even at the time should have been called out, but now in hindsight, they're embarrassing to someone like me. That one of my colleagues would have made an assertion like that, and you know,
Well, I can't even imagine the scrutiny you were under when you first started talking about this. On I mean, you're an accredited PhD. You're a college. You're a real professor. Professor,
yeah,
you're not a cryptozoologist. You're not.
right.
You didn't go to Acme U or Sasquatch U. I mean, you are a PhD. You are a doctorate, and that's one of the things I've always loved about you. I mean, you're not afraid to give an honest opinion out there, and I just Jeff Duggar, he's one of our listeners over in Illinois, says Dr. Meldrum is my hero. This is absolutely freaking awesome. Thanks, Jeff. We appreciate that. And Jeff Cast, good to see you. Jeff Falloon, got a lot of Jeffs here tonight. What
Yeah,
is the weight? What's the weight estimate as based on the depth of footprints, Dr.
yeah.
Meldrum?
Well, inferring weight from the depth of footprints is a bit dodgy. You can certainly make statements about relative weights by comparison, but the idea that we can bring out some sort of metric tool, and do a compression study, and like a structural engineer would do when designing or evaluating a site for a building, is not really straightforward. But what I'm much more comfortable with, if you take the Patterson-Gimlin film subject, for which we have a scale that is her footprint, and there's been some kind of loose, let's just say loose rather than sloppy, loose application of that scale and efforts to try to actually come up with some dimensions. But I think I'm quite confident in John Green again, who early on did some very careful tracings of enlargements of the subject of the film frames, individual frames, and using the foot as the scale, came up with some dimensions of the various limb segments and torso, from as viewed from the side and from front on. Using those dimensions, I then simply modeled Patty, and he set her at about 6'8", just a good moderate, which I'm comfortable. A measure between 6.5 and 7 feet, a little more towards the 7 foot perhaps, but I went with his 6'8" height, and then used those dimensions and modeled the body as if it were simply a series of cylinders. So it's a crude model, but it's a good ballpark. I mean, we're in the infield, I think, as far as accuracy. And then once we know the volume, we have data, good reliable data, for what density is for composite tissue in a mammalian body. A good mixture of bone and muscle and fatty tissue and fascia and ligaments and so forth. And so, again, ballparking it, but still um, using that measurement, and that may be. I used the measurement for human, which probably underestimates because this thing probably has a much more robust skeleton and um, and probably much greater dense muscle mass as opposed to adipose tissue. But in any case, came up with a measure in excess of 700 pounds. It was interesting because just the other day, I'm in the process of writing this book, and so I'm going back and culling through a lot of old talks, a lot of old presentations, rereading some of these books, dusting them off and rereading them. But there was a clip that had Rene DeHinden and his assessment of the Patterson Gimlin film. He put it at 700 pounds, which at that time was on the high side. Bob had estimated 400 pounds, and he's a guy who spends a lot of time around horses, knows horse flesh. So you would think, he'd have a pretty good feel for it. But then later he modified his estimate and said, I really think I underestimated that, he said, and he bumped his estimate up higher. So 700 pounds for Patty as a female. We know that there's sexual dimorphism in body size because there are tracks. Patty had a footprint that was 14 and a half up to 15, actually closer to 15 inches. And one of her feet was slightly bigger than the other, which can have an impact too on using that as a scale to estimate the height. Because if you're measuring the 15-inch footprint and you're only calling it 14 and a half inches, that half inch gets multiplied about 4 or 5 times as you use the foot for a scale. So you can be off by 2 to 4 inches just through measurement error by taking the 14 and a half over the 15-inch dimension. So it's important to bear in mind that these things are approximations.
So let
Yeah.
Patty is the film that Mr. Patterson and Mr. Gilman. Patty's the epiphany of Bigfoot evidence. It's not, nothing's ever been done like it. I mean, as far as something that you can actually tangibly look at, that's probably the I don't the Rosetta Stone of Bigfoot stuff, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, the benchmark.
Yeah, yeah.
It are very high. There's some that are close. I mean, the Freeman footage, and we didn't we mentioned it in Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, the book, but there's more analysis that is being done. One of the projects that Doug Hychek undertook was to contract a commission, what am I after? I just went blank.
Like satellite or
No, that down here, a drone. Good
oh, okay,
grief!
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
This is part of the. I mean, it's part
Hey,
of getting old.
yeah, don't worry about it. I go through this every day, Dr. Meldrum.
Yeah, but depriving your brain of oxygen doesn't improve your ability to recall either. So
Don't worry about it. Good.
I found, as a result of that medical emergency, I have holes. I have, especially, I like to joke that it's my directory file that's corrupted. A lot of times, the information is still there, but the linkages, the ability to recall quickly
It
and
happens.
organize that information has been kind of
You're fine. It happens all the time.
yeah.
So
So
now, okay, you said drone. So
a
you
drone equipped with lidar,
yeah.
so penetrating lidar. So he did this extensive scan of the Freeman footage site up there at Deduck Springs, and so we've got a map now of that whole hillside that peers right down through the canopy, and so we can replicate the placement of the steps of what you see on the video, and then of course do all the comparative shots, which we've begun to undertake. And so the Freeman footage is really quite intriguing. There's some remarkable convergences, some parallels to. It's just that the quality's different. I mean,
Yeah.
you're shooting with video format, low resolution video format, compared to the best cine film, and people don't appreciate what film was. But the ability to enlarge that image on that 16 millimeter film, this little thing that's a fraction of a stamp size, blow it up to the size of that. There we go, the size of that creature on the wall behind me, which was only 1.8 millimeters on that frame, absolute size, and blow that up and still be able to see these remarkable details is just amazing.
Well, I mean, you and I were talking again before air, and just some of the stuff that I've seen. I mean, would somebody put up $1 million if someone could absolutely debunk that footage, and nobody got the money.
Yeah, no, it's
You can see the muscle mass on that thing move, and I'm sorry, but nobody had the thought the for see I'm doing the same thing, so don't worry about it. Nobody had the mindset to put breasts on a suit in that time to go film that, to fake that. I mean, and
no,
and
yeah,
nobody, and if anybody's ever been out, most of the people that follow my stuff, they're outdoors people. They go out and they fish. They're on sandbars. They're on rock bars, and you can't walk with that grace and that step in a suit. I'm sorry, it's not gonna happen.
yeah,
You know. So
yeah.
I've always looked at that footage as that was a mind opener. I always tell everybody, I said, listen, I can't say they're real, but I can't say they're not. Especially going back to you and getting back to the footprints and the castings.
Yeah.
You've actually been out on, I don't know how many expeditions have you been out on? Hundreds?
Well, I don't call them expeditions anymore. They're it's just field work. But I have the luxury of being on a 9 month contract, and so sometimes I teach courses during the summer, or sometimes have other commitments. But I have those summer months where I'm either doing research in the laboratory, working on projects, or like now I'm here, I'm writing, I'm working on another book, or I'm in the field. And unfortunately, my ability to go into the field has been unfortunately very curtailed. But yeah, over the past, what has it been now, since 1996? So that's 18 years, every summer, at least a month.
Yeah.
So add that up, that's more than a year of time in the field.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. So,
so
I mean, how close have you gotten to actually seeing something?
Well, I caught a glimpse. The association has rendered it controversial in many people's minds, and that was, I was up in Alberta, Canada, at the invitation of Todd Standing, who is quite a polarizing figure. Uh, People either think he walks on water, or they think he's a total scam artist, and there's a very little middle ground. It seems. As far as I'm concerned, the jury's out. I haven't brought the gavel down. I have still lingering questions and concerns, but I've had also very positive experiences, and this was one of those. We were finding sign. We were finding footprints. We were having baits taken. There were, he was showing me tree breaks and uh, structures that I have a fairly low opinion of as far as Bigfoot evidence, as
Yeah.
to Sasquatch. But we it was ideal habitat. And on this particular night, the short story is, something approached camp, and I caught a glimpse of it through night vision monocular. And they found. I had to leave the next morning before sunup. It just happened that was the end of my stay, I had to make it back to the airport, and the sun didn't come up that late in the season. It was in, as I remember, mid-October, late October, that far north. The sun didn't come up till like 9:30 or almost 10, and
Right.
went down about 3:34 in the evening. and and so, but we would routinely stay up late into the night, into the dark anyway, and around the campfire in hopes of attracting curiosity. I mean, we would hike. We'd probably put in 10 miles a day minimum, uh, and covering ground. And his strategy was to make our presence known. And we'd buzz around on the sandbars and whatnot, looking for tracks on his little amphibious vehicle, and flew the drone around, and did surveys and so forth and so forth. It was really, really a fantastic experience. And anyway, I caught a glimpse. If you imagine that image of Patty there over my shoulder, but her being absolutely jet black in silhouette at night with, that green hue. And as just as the sandbar is lighter colored, the granite gravel bed of the road that we were camped on, the road was bermed to prevent access back off of the the trailhead there. And we were camped right up against that, at the end of the road, against that berm. And that's what I caught a glimpse of. If you're interested, you can search online, and Todd actually produced a quite good little documentary, and he's very true to the facts. He didn't embellish. He's very enthusiastic, and he has a tendency to kind of name drop, but his portrayal of things as they occurred, and the follow-up investigation to try to find the sign where it had walked is quite accurate and reliable.
Where can we find that, Jeff?
Well, you'll have to, if you Google Todd Standing, and I think I'm just trying to remember. I'm caught flat-footed. I can't think of the
No,
name.
that's okay.
Bigfoot. No, it's not Bigfoot Revealed.
Todd Standing Alberta footage or something.
Yeah, if you did that, I'm sure it'll come up. And
All right, I'll track it down. No big deal.
Yeah.
No big deal. So I did see you were out. You were out somewhere in Canada in a cabin that was reportedly having activity. Tell people about that one, because I thought that was pretty unique.
Yeah. Right. That was, we had two opportunities. The first, we were up there it's a place called Snellgrove Lake. And it's, it's kind of interesting that there's actually a name. I think there's a name just because there was a cabin built there, because you go up, you have to fly in. There are no roads. It's like a checkerboard, if even that much land. When you're flying over, it's just land and water intermingled and intertwined all over the place. I don't know how they would, before GPS, how they would find their locations up there, because it's hard to, I guess they'd get familiar with the lay, and there's certain landmarks, but tons and tons of lakes. Anyway, we were up there. It's a fishing cabin, lots of walleye, and great. We did a lot of fishing while we were there.
Gotta love the walleye, Dr. Meldrum.
Oh man, fresh fish every night.
Yeah.
For dinner. It was fantastic. And anyway, on this one trip, the first trip, Doug informed me that there was this interesting piece of potential evidence that a nail board had been used, as was the old, tried and true technique to prevent bears from pushing in the doors. You would put a piece of plywood that had nails, or in this case, they were galvanized screws. So you had literally a board with screws every 3 or 4 inches. Excuse me, my nose is itching.
That's okay.
And that had been up against the door because something had vandalized the cabin. At first, they thought it was a bear, but the problem was he and the owner and the insurance adjusters were saying this isn't typical bear damage. Usually, what a bear will do when they get in, one of the things they almost always do. This was news to me, but the insulation in a refrigerator, as it breaks down, produces formalin, and the formalin smells like the formic acid secreted by ants. And so the bears interpret this smell as a sign of
Ooh.
an ant colony.
Yeah.
And they tear out the lining of a fridge. And that hadn't occurred. The fridge had been tipped over, but it had not been gutted by a bear. All the cabinets were pulled off of the walls, things like that. It was just, it was either a malicious vandal or it was something that was intent on discouraging people from maintaining their residence there.
Yeah.
But he said something had stepped on the nail board and had bled, and he was interested in having a DNA analysis conducted on this blood. And I said, well, that's really interesting, exciting, intriguing, but where has the nail board been kept? Oh, it's just the owner just leans it up against the side of the cabin throughout the winter, and when it's not in use.
Right.
And I say, well, it's exposed to UV light, to the fluctuation in temperature. The chances of there being any recoverable DNA is pretty much zilch. And so I thought, well, but we're going to do the interview. We'll talk about it. Blah, blah, blah. Well, as we're sitting there looking at this board, I'm intrigued because you could see the screws because of the threads. You could see screws had tissue embedded in the threads of these screws. And as I looked closer, you could see that there was fatty tissue. There was this oily, fatty tissue that was down closest to the board. And then you had this reddish, it looked like beef jerky. It was desiccated shards of muscle tissue up higher. And once in a while, there'd be a hair caught in a screw and snagged and entwined on it. Well, as I started looking at there were some screws that had tissue and some that didn't. And it wasn't just random, they were clustered. So we took a Sharpie and outlined a perimeter around all of the screws that were encrusted with tissue. And what you got was this outline of the back 2/3 of what looked like a tapering and then kind of hourglass shaped foot outline with a big broad heel and a tapered shank flaring out. The toes were hanging over the board on the other side. If that interpretation is correct? So we carefully collected, and then there was also blood that had gone down the shaft of the screw and through the board and had kind of pooled underneath. At this point, it was so degraded and so weathered, it looked almost like red paint rather than blood. And it turns out that they had a real trouble trying to get any DNA from it.
Sure.
And so there was never anything resolved as far as DNA. One of the members of the team was named Kurt Nelson, and he was a microbiologist. And when Todd Disotell at NYU was unsuccessful at getting any DNA from the blood sample, Kurt went to work on it. He said, "I'm not going to give up so easily," and he thought maybe there was some dampening agent, some quality to the galvanizing mineral or treatment of the screws that was somehow um, thwarting the primers. So he tried to purify it. He ran the extracted sample out into uh, a gel, electrophoresis gel, repeatedly is one way to try to kind of separate the DNA from any contaminants. And then as it spreads out, you cut out the leading edge, and then re-elute that, redissolve it in the solution, and then do it again. And he eventually got some sequenceable DNA. He was limited. He was doing it on the good graces of his host, his boss, his
Sure.
host researcher, and so he only sequenced a small fragment, 300 bases, and there was one substitution of a nucleotide, a single nucleotide substitution, which didn't show up in the human genomes on record, but was reported for a sample of chimpanzee DNA. So the question is, the more you manipulate this stuff, the more you do things to it, the chances of introducing damage or artifactual,
Having
uh,
contamination somewhere.
well,
Yeah,
or contamination even, yeah.
yeah.
It's just the point being that as intriguing as that was, 1 out of 300, after all this manipulation, was not very conclusive.
I got you. Hey Jeff, how you doing? Tony Casey, good to see you. Thank you. Daryl Adams, our buddy down in Oklahoma. Have you ever met Daryl Adams, Dr. Jeff? He,
The name rings a bell a little bit, but
have
familiar.
you have you ever met or talked to Toby Johnson?
Hmm.
Toby and Daryl are the guys that had the Al Moon Lab encounters in California, and
Oh,
Daryl and I became kind of buddies since I started doing the show a couple years ago. Real nice fella. He's on here watching right now. He wanted to know if there was any ever greasy type of prints on the fridge or in the cabinets from the hands.
well, back then we weren't even looking for that. This notion of a greasy, sebaceous residue is kind of a new idea, a new thought, and it's interesting that in talking to some of the zookeepers who work with great apes, they have an sometimes an excessive production of this sebum, a product of the sebaceous sweat glands, and which are more common in the apes. They don't have the watery eccrine sweat glands, which we have profusely. That produces the wet, watery sweat that is involved with evaporative cooling. And so it's just been recently. This is something that Doug is very excited about. I've done a bit of research into the potential of what this represents in the writing of the book, but it'll be interesting to see. Doug is trying to commission some labs to actually do a chemical and biological analysis of this. I don't expect any real surprises, but if they're able to get some proteins that
Yeah,
are distinctive to this sample that aren't found in human sebum or in great ape sebum, um, or even if they are, to have a handprint with that greasy residue would be quite interesting. Lend some credibility, perhaps, to the to
yeah.
the.
You guys need to talk to Daryl. He's a super nice guy. You would really
Yeah,
like him, and he's got a bunch of pictures with that residue up
yeah.
on. He had a mechanic shed that they would leave cameras, and they would put little off like apples or oranges.
Yeah.
He had one side. I'll let him tell you when you guys visit. But he
Okay.
actually had one that was 7 or 8 foot tall. The gutter was actually crimped, like
Oh.
it was and there was residue left with that.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, it's fascinating. He's got pictures and stuff. I'll send you his contact info.
Yeah.
You and him would hit it off. Jacob
Okay.
Pike says he just got back from Canada. A lot of Bigfoot sightings in Canada. Heard about. Thanks, Jake. I hope you caught some fish. Rick says I'm listening outside. This guy is so interesting. I have 3 does on the edge of the yard listening in too. I got deer listening to us. I met Dr. Meldrum at Washington at the Bigfoot conference last year. Daryl said. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey,
Okay.
Kenny Cole. So, and hey, everybody, the show is brought to you in part by our friends at Revelton and Onyx Hunt. Don't go in the woods without them. I told Dr. Jeff I've been looking forward to this for so long. I didn't even take commercial breaks. We're just doing the whole thing. So, because he's so busy, it's hard to get him on. So, um,
Sure.
what I'm going to go back to what we were talking about off air. What
Okay.
really flipped the trigger for me? I mean, you actually saw Daryl. Daryl has seen. He said he's actually got a knee casting. Him and Tobe found a knee casting, and they got hairs out of the casting where you could tell it wasn't a bear.
Hmm.
And Daryl's they lived out in Northern California for a long time. You guys really should talk. But
Yeah.
I've got, like I said, I've got a friend of mine, Jesse Richards. Jesse and his father saw one deer hunting in Iowa here,
Oh,
on the Raccoon River. I think it was the Raccoon. He told me. And then I've got another gentleman that I know. His name is Mark Parker, and he was in A Flash of Beauty, that documentary. I've had Mark on the show a few times, and he's an avid elk bow hunter. And him and I were talking about thermals and how to set up on different hunts. And Mark's had a couple encounters. And when I talk to somebody that's not trying to make money off of it, Dr. Meldrum, uh, that's what gets me more excited than anything because they're not trying to profit by their experience. Does that make sense?
sure. Yeah, it does. I mean, I don't begrudge someone trying to
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they're
trying to
why would
facilitate
yeah why would they
involvement.
why would they set themselves up for all this scrutiny
Yeah.
and
Oh, yeah.
harassment if they're not going to profit from it? That to me that just goes wow. It weighs more on me. You
Well,
know
sure. Well,
you know
yeah. Yeah. No,
so
I agree. There's a line. I mean, I only react that way because I get criticized
oh you do.
for for accepting or expecting a speaker's fee for going to these events. But I mean, if the organizers are doing it as a means of revenue stream, then obviously they're if they're doing it on the
I don't have an issue with that. You're an expert, and you should be compensated for your time. What? Thank you, Patrick. Patrick O'Connor says to tell you hi, Dr. Meldrum. Thank you, Dr. Meldrum, for taking the time tonight. Jeff said in New York. You got a lot
certainly.
of Jeffs out there following you, buddy.
Wow, that is yeah. I haven't been up to what 6 or 7 so far.
At least, yeah, that's crazy. Um, where are we going to be? Or we got about 8 minutes left. Where are we
Yeah,
going to be? Where we're going to be able to? If I would ever see one, if I'm out hunting, and Dr. Jeff, I'm just telling you flat out, I would never try to shoot one.
right,
I would try to video it, photography, get my phone out.
right,
I've got professional cameras with me at all times because of the TV show. I would try to get actual documentation on footage. That would be my go-to right away. I mean, I'd probably freeze for like, am I really seeing what I'm seeing? But
right,
I mean,
right.
as far as the tracks and everything, how long do you think it'll be before we'll have unequivocal proof, or do you think it's actually going to take a body?
Oh well, the only thing short of a body would be uh, a replicated novel DNA sequence. And so, I mean, that's what when I sort of did an about face, I actually started in this working with someone who had experience as a big game hunter and had the wherewithal that I thought we had to have in order to carry this out. But I had, and it wasn't an easy decision to to undertake that approach. But I have done a 180, and I that is not my goal, and I my objective is to demonstrate by way of DNA. There's actually a growing literature in the conservation literature, particularly, where the old kind of Victorian ethic of shoot first and ask the scientific questions once the specimen is on the table is being challenged and saying, especially in the case of rare and endangered species, and especially in those where the lethal collection of an individual may have tremendous impact on the social organization of this endangered species. that we should rely on. We should be satisfied with a novel DNA specimen, a voucher DNA specimen, and Sasquatch may be the ultimate test case of that philosophy. So that's the goal. I think environmental DNA uh, will be has the potential for breakthrough. Um, Unfortunately, when you stop and think about it, that DNA that's collected in the field by eDNA methodologies is not pristine. Usually, it's very fragmented and so forth. And when you're working with trying to differentiate two extremely closely related species, that remarkable similarity, 99% perhaps, your fragments, it's going to be hard to not only to differentiate them from the human contamination, but also to realign and reassemble the sequence in order to identify those unique characteristics that will allow you to distinguish the unknown from human DNA sequence. So I don't know. That's going to be. I think also we mentioned. I struggled with drones. As drone technology improves, and as things like lidar. I've actually had conversations with some lidar techs, and very frankly asked them, when will I be able to take a picture of and differentiate an upright 700-pound gorilla, 800-pound gorilla in the forest? And they say, well, not yet, but because penetration is the problem
Right, the
with thermal.
canopy. Well,
Yeah,
especially out there, the canopy is so thick. I mean, you could
yeah,
have a plane go down in a couple miles and take you forever to find it. I mean, it's so
yeah,
thick.
right.
Yeah,
If we had some military grade, at least things that you see on television, where that can see through walls and so forth, and multi stories of buildings. But until that's on the shelf, uh, these back to the lidar. These techs said, "Well, we don't have the resolution quite yet, but give it a little time. Not much, but give it a little time." And he said, "We may be able to help you out." So that I hope in my lifetime will be where you can fly a drone over and you can count the deer and the bears and the moose and the Sasquatch, and differentiate them from one another just with your lidar imagery. So we've got to do something that extends our reach
no,
because
I get it. I get.
this is
I just,
rare,
we were
very
talking
rare.
before. People. How many of them are running around? I mean, how
Right.
would you even try to qualify a question like that?
Well, there are ways. I think we've got good clues about their solitarity. About we have some indirect evidence and inference drawn therefrom that suggests they have a very large home range size, maybe on the order of 1,000 square miles, at least 500 to 1,000 square miles. We know that their habitat is very dependent. Their preference is very dependent on precipitation levels. It corresponds very closely with black bear habitat. So a good rule of thumb is if your neck of the woods doesn't support a viable bear population, the chances of Bigfoot eking out a living are um, pretty much zero.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you have black bear, there's maybe a possibility that Sasquatch reside there in fewer numbers. But the rule of thumb is 200 black bear for every 100 Sasquatch. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, for every one Sasquatch. So, like in Idaho, there's 35,000 black bear. That means about 175 Sasquatch in the entire state.
Well, and
So
and I was talking to a gentleman. His name's Do you know Mel Scahan? Have
no,
you, he's a
I
Native American out in Oregon. No, that's okay. Super nice
yeah,
guy.
yeah,
And he was a forester, so
oh,
that was his job. And he goes, Dan, a lot of the people don't realize, but a lot of these they migrate with the food source. And I never really even thought about that, but that made a lot of sense to me. That if there was a population, or I could see where they would migrate.
sure, sure, or at least they move through a large habitat. I don't think that there are vast migratory paths that span the continent or go from the Rockies to the coast of California or something like that. But within those large areas, yes, they're moving with the availability of different resources, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's another reason the encounters are so rare. And I have to question, when you have individuals who are very enthusiastic and they're out there every weekend having activity,
Mm.
I have to really question, when you press them, what is the activity? Well, it's a bump in the night. It's a call. It's a sense that they're being watched. It's eye shine, which almost certainly is something else, because I've been in those situations
Yeah.
with people who are over interpret their experiences. So I mean, I don't mean to in any way to discourage people from attempting to have these experiences, but you need to have a high standard of what is evidence, and you need to be very critical, and accept, before you jump to a very unlikely explanation, you have to be able to eliminate the more common one. Are those eyes, as in the case of this one experience that pops to mind, you know, I was assured that those were Sasquatch. And I said, well, let's go see. It had just started to snow lightly. There was a quarter inch of snow on the ground. And we get up to where the eye shine was, and it wasn't 8 feet off the ground because there was a slope from our vantage point. And rather than 18-inch Sasquatch tracks, there was a little pair of raccoon tracks. And it just as clear and pristine as could be in the snow. And so, the person was rather chagrined, but it was a great opportunity to learn from their experience that you don't jump to conclusions. You have to evaluate something and eliminate the much more common potential explanation before you resort to a much less likely experience.
Yeah. Hey, Chris Lewandowski in PA. Good to see you, buddy. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Daryl, I'll call you later. I can't keep up with you. You got so many things on here. It's crazy. I'm going to give Dr. Meldrum your number. I'm going to let you guys talk. You guys would hit it off. That's funny. Dr. Meldrum, I'm out of time, and I got another hour of things I could talk to you about. Can we get you back on sometime, please?
Of course. Yeah, certainly we can do
That would be an honor, and I would be very grateful for you to do that. If someone's looking for some of your books, what's the best way for them to get them? I'm going to definitely get Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. I think that's going to be a great read.
Oh, it's available on Amazon, or Barnes and Noble bookstores should carry it still. Another source that has also a lot of my field guides, for example, and the young learner reader activity books is Paradise K. Paradise K. It's actually paracay.com. That's PARACAY.com, and it's a publisher out of Arcata, California. Has a whole lineup of really fun and interesting and informative Bigfoot books and paraphernalia. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, listen. I hope you continue healing up, and I can't wait to visit with you again, because I want to talk to you. The eye shine, or that tip. What is it? Tipton membrane. What's
Tapetum lucidum.
Thank you. See, I told you. I can remember about this much of anatomy, and that's about it. I could spend a half an hour with you on that just alone. But
Yeah.
I'll send you some dates, and you tell me if we can get you back on before the holidays, if that's okay.
Okay. Oh, sure. Very good. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Meldrum. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. Take
Thank
care.
you. Oh, my pleasure, sir. There he goes, Dr. Jeff Meldrum, everybody. What a nice feller. I am going to say goodbye to my Facebook live stream. So thank you for everybody. We'll talk to you on Saturday on the regular the Outdoor Call radio show with Outdoors Dan. And you have a great night. And as always, make sure you tell everybody about the Outdoor Call radio app. I'll see you later. Thanks, everybody.